To serve the people. To worship God is nothing other than to serve the people.
It does not need your rosary, for our hearts are full of rose.
All peoples are members of the same body, created from one essence.
If faith brings suffering to one member,
the others cannot stay at rest. More with less. I want you all to take a moment and think about your personal lives. And if you would like to, you can share an opinion or something that you've observed. But think of something where you're doing more with less. Anything come to mind that anyone wants to share?
With the strengthening of my leg, the harder I push it, the more reaction I get. If I do it really gentle, I get more movement than I do if I force it.
So changing the style of your exercise and stretching techniques to help strengthen your muscle based on how things have changed.
A principle of yoga too.
Principle of yoga, yeah, okay. Anyone else? Terry?
Taking out my internet, I now get more accomplished by just going to spots where I have free downloads and I don't get caught up in things.
Anyone else?
Well, I'm making my own mulch for next summer. And I do that and I'm saving it.
Okay.
And I do that when I cut the grass, when I mow. I spread it out on the driveway and let the sun dry it. And then I'm storing it. And instead of buying those awful wood chips that I've been buying for ever.
We got so much.
And I'll be buying more wood chips next spring. I'll take up what you let go of. Anyone else? So more with less. It's a concept that I've been ruminating on for some time. In a society that's been based more around extraction than conservation, we start to look at what we're doing. One of the things that has bothered me for some time has been the wage stagnation in the United States of America. This has happened largely since the 1970s. When we look at production, our production numbers have greatly increased. Our output has increased. As an economy, we're creating more, producing more, but the wage for laborers has stagnated, decreasing and not changing. Recently in the United Kingdom, there was a group of laborers in a shipping and receiving yard at a wharf that went on strike. And if you were listening to foreign news, what they said was that they were going on strike because the 7.5% increase in wages did not meet the increase in cost of living, so they were going on strike as a result. Not too uncommon in other parts of the world. In the United States, when is the last time in 1 year that someone received a 7.5% increase in their wages in 1 year? I heard some chuckles. Right? We're doing more with less. When it comes to labor, we're doing more work. Yes, there's been technology advancements. We've improved efficiencies. We've improved things like that. But the actual laborers are doing more with less. Because that 1.5% increase that you get and you're grateful for, that your school board negotiates for, that Governor Kim Reynolds approves, that the Social Security Administration applies to your Social Security check, it's more with less because it doesn't make up for the increase in expenses. This is even prior to the last 6 months when we look at things, when we look at the cost of living. So one of the things that I wanted to do with you today to make a point, because a lot of this has to do with taxation and how taxation and tax code changed in the 1970s and 80s. So, just doing a little research, pulling up my numbers, and this is from the People's History Home. So, okay, the cost for a 1 pound of hamburger. Who can guess how much it cost in 1970?
$1.98.
$1.98? Well, you know, not all of us shop at the nice grocery stores like you do, Marlene. I know you've got good taste in food, so maybe in your grocery store. But for me at Fairway or Cub Foods or the local grocery store, how much do you think that pound of hamburger in 1970 cost?
69 cents.
Ooh, you are off by a penny, Greg. In 1970, a pound of hamburger cost 70 cents a pound. How much did it cost when you went last week to buy a pound of hamburger? I heard $4?
$4.98.
I was gonna say it's almost $5, right? Okay. So 1970. Who remembers or knows or could guess what you paid for the average loaf of bread? It was sliced bread, by the way. Greatest invention of all time, sliced bread, in the opinion of some.
A quarter?
25 cents.
Greg, are you cheating? So, Greg is right, once again, 25 cents for a loaf of bread.
I lived through it, dude.
I know, you lived through it. So maybe you're not cheating, you just have really good memory and the rest of us are just
I
woods.
remember 10 cents in
Okay.
University of Iowa.
So, all right, 1970. So, what did you pay for the loaf of bread last week, if anyone's bought bread recently?
$1.99.
Oh, did you get a sale? Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, that is sale loaf of bread, or that is second day bread, or something along those
That's
lines.
more like closer to $5, isn't it?
Yeah, depending on the type of bread you get, quality, if you're looking at quality comparison, right? Okay. 1970, when you were burning rubber and screwing around, what were you paying for a gallon of gas? Oh, John, you better speak.
29 cents?
John's close. So it might have been in rural areas, but the average was 36 cents in 1970.
I was never in a rural area.
Yeah. So, how much did you pay to put on gas this week?
$3.69,
$3.69. Okay. All right.
So that's 10 times.
Average cost of a new car. So maybe turned 16 in 1970, Mama Andrea's buying her a new set of wheels. Because Mama's an attorney, so she's getting her baby a new car, right? Maybe how much do you think she's going to pay for a new car in 1970? Any idea?
$7 bajillion.
It's a little high. Might be on a different planet, right?
2,000.
Ooh, Eileen, you are close. $3,450 was the average price of a new car. Okay? Okay? You're getting your first job, 1970, annual wages. What's the average going to be for a year's income? Now I think I've scared you with some of these other ones. So now you're a little low. So the average income in 1970 was $9,400. Okay?
I know the minimum wage is $1.60.
Federal minimum wage? I don't know. Was it $1.60? It might have been higher than that. I think it was when I don't have that number pulled up in front of me, but it might have been higher. Because we talked about how
pretty close.
My first job was $1. I was happy because I had $1.65. It was 5 cents over.
Okay.
I got 25 cents.
Okay.
I got 75
I was a
cents
nurse,
for my first
nurse's
job.
aide,
All right. That was 75 cents an hour as a nurse's aide.
25.
And now we're begging for nurses' aides at a minimum of 16 an hour usually, at least. Okay. So it seems like, depending on how you look at it, it might be good. You're buying a new house in 1970, what are you paying?
15.
70.
Well,
25,000.
Judy doesn't need a nice neighborhood. She might be living over on the west side. So,
Speak exceptional.
Hey, the west side is a nice neighborhood.
See what kind of neighbors you get?
neighbors like D. All right, so in 1970, keep in mind this is the average cost of a new home. So we average across the country, right? Average cost of a new home in 1970 was $23,450. I know someone that the house that they still live in on the north side, when they bought it back in the 70s, they paid $13,000 for their home. The same home now is valued at roughly, I think, $235,000. And so go back and take a look at those wages. And you think, well, I'm not getting paid $1.79 an hour, $1.50, or $1.75 an hour. Where have they come? And now take a think about this. When you were a nurse's aide, were there more nurses on the floor?
Yes,
Okay. Were there more directors of nursing?
you know,
Okay. Did you have an administrator for your unit?
probably.
Did you do your own laundry in-house, so you had housekeeping?
No.
Okay. Did you have a cook?
No.
Okay. Depends on the unit style that you worked in. So, as we move forward as a society, jobs and duties have consolidated, we've eliminated other roles, and as we've eliminated those things, the wages haven't necessarily always kept pace with what's going on. Recently, we celebrated Labor Day and the celebration of the labor movement. The labor movement gave us the 5-day work week, holidays, paid time off, sick leave, health insurance, many of those things that we come to take for granted now and expect when we go to get a job. They also helped with wage negotiation and ensuring that people got a fair pay. Now think about in the last 10 years in the state of Iowa, what's happened to unions? Major things,
Expanded.
right?
You can't represent yourself anymore.
You can't represent yourself anymore. They've taken away collective bargaining. They've taken away several things to take power away from the unions, right? And with that, when I say we're going to help save taxpayers, we're not going to raise taxes, we're going to keep costs low, what does that translate to? More with less. It means that I'll get paid the same wage as a state employee, but depending on what part of the state government I work in, I'll take on more duties. I'll be expected to cover more counties. Prime example, from the time that I started working in public health to the time I ended, I started being responsible for 3 counties. And by the time I ended, we were covering roughly 14. So think about the quality of the work that we get. Yes, there's advancements in technology, advancements in transportation, communication, education, but it's more with less. And I think about that, we're paying more for groceries in the store, but we're actually getting less. Has anyone bought groceries lately? Have you noticed the slight change? Pick up that box of pasta and you're like, damn, it's light. Things have gotten smaller, but then the price tag goes up. And the question that we have to ask, did the laborers producing those things, do you think they got an increase in pay?
No.
Right.
Do you think anyone came down and said, yep, you're getting a raise because we're raising prices?
They'll say that, but it's not true.
The farmer isn't getting it either, the producer.
Yeah. So more with less. Farmers, this is kind of personal for me. I had an uncle that went bankrupt dairy farming. Family dairy went out of business because it was no longer financially viable. And you have to think about those things and the wider impact that they have on people. So I went down and made a list of the things when that happened, in the average family when that occurs. So, no more dairy, right? No more fertilizer on the fields from dairy cattle. unless you've changed and gone into beef cattle. If the family moves, and let's say they have 3 kids, that's 3 students from the local school district that are gone. Depending on the state that you live in and what you get in federal and state aid for students, that's anywhere between $3,000 and $8,000 per student that your local school district just lost. It means less business at the local co-op and elevator. It means someone not shopping for groceries at the local grocery store. A few less exhibits at the county fair. Fewer volunteers, members of the 4-H club. 1 less member of the Homemaker Society, your church guild, members of your congregation, people making a contribution or a pledge, right? That's if they leave. If they stay, it means serious adjustments in life and how things are done. Trying to make accommodations. The fight of the middle class is what we've been observing the last few decades. And it's a fight that's taking an interesting turn. When Ronald Reagan was running for the governor of California, he assailed the free speech and anti-war movements, promising taxpayers that if elected, he'd get college kids off picket lines and back into class, with comments like, they were spoiled and don't deserve the education they're getting, and that the state should not subsidize intellectual curiosity. He won the election in a landslide. 14 years later, Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States, running again against a host of mythical foes, from welfare queens to the omnipotent evil empire. And he and his administration never shed their disgust towards the elitist campuses that young people dare, and the young people in them who dare to question the system. And then with tax code changes to tax law, and changes to how welfare worked, we slowly defunded through the Reagan administration those institutions. And they paid the price for their students that spoke up. And they paid the price in more ways than one. Just curious, has anyone looked at student debt ratios from the 1970s to now? I mean, this is just heartwarming stuff that, like, if you can't sleep at night and you just wanted to, like, feel warm in your heart, it's really, there's a lot of data out there. I will tell you, you will not be bored. So the Education Data Initiative. So let's go back to 1970. So let's see here. Just looking. So the year's 1970, you're graduating from higher education. What do you think your debt was as a student at that point in time? If you had debt as a college student? $5,000. Ooh, where'd you go? That's expensive. So the average debt for a college student at that time in 1970 would have been $1,070. That's the average debt, right? So with inflation, what does that come to in May of 2021 dollars? What's that come to roughly?
You mean if it
Inflation-wise.
stayed with the
Yeah,
prices?
stayed that dollar amount and say, so roughly the dollar amount with inflation is that equals to about $7,458 for your total debt from graduating from a 4-year. I mean, the lawyer and the biologist are laughing right now. How much debt in 2009, when I stopped going to USD, do you think I had after a year and a half? 26, right about that. I think it was at 23. A year and a half with no degree, with student aid, FAFSA, loans, and paying some of it myself. And I still had that in debt. And so the comments made of more with less, in discussing the student loan forgiveness and the impact, a comment was made to me by a financial advisor that he said to me, well, I bet you didn't need that, so why should we have given out? I'm sure you didn't need that, right? And with no embarrassment, I pointed out that I still had about $12,000 left on my student loans to pay from 2008 and 2009. And I'm on the cheap side. So we're doing more with less. The bill's bigger, but now they're saying you need the 4-year degree and 5 years of experience to get the job that some people in 1970 might have walked out of high school with a high school diploma and worked their way up the system to get. How things have changed. When we look back at the tax code and how things changed, in 1980 when Reagan was elected and promised to cut the top marginal tax rate, he did just that. And the top marginal tax rate was lowered over his 8 years in office from 73% to 28% on incomes over just $29,000. So this is the lowest the tax rate had been since 1925. And so when he followed through on his promise to cut taxes, where do you think we made up for that in the budget? Services. You can cut to an extent, you can trim and refine, but after a point, the cuts are hard cuts that you have to make. Cuts in services, cuts in service delivery, cuts in everything. So one of the things that we have to think about is that at the time in 1970 and then later, with the tax cuts, then the focus came going from forgiving grants for college education in a large portion to those transitioning over to being replaced with loans with high interest rates and things like that. In the United States of America, out of curiosity, what's the best way to build wealth, intergenerational wealth in this country? To inherit it, okay, or through
Property.
Home ownership. Buying your first home and building that equity and wealth is one of the best ways to build wealth in the United States of America. When we look at the average price of homes, wage stagnation, and then we look at the increase in debt that students are left with after they graduate, what do you think that does to intergenerational wealth building for future generations? Those that cannot pay are left to pay for the rest of their lives for their situations that they find themselves in. And so, how did trickle-down economics work? Fly to the moon if you're rich, right? But only there's 2 or 3 of you. So those are the things of more with less today that I think about. Our Food and Drug Administration, which is charged with inspecting, doing things for food safety, pharmaceuticals, all of those things, they're expected to do more work with less funding. IRS, tax code enforcement. They're receiving one of the largest infusions of revenue that they will get as far as funding and doing their services for the first time in decades, improving antiquated systems to help retrieve taxes. But what would our country have looked like if we hadn't cut taxes and we had said we were going to do more with less while staying within our budgetary guidelines? Where would we be? A generation of people that graduated college with lower debt amounts. What would it have done to our workforce? You have a mountain of debt and you have your first job. Your boss does something a little bit unethical, but you have bills to pay. No debt. Well, I'm going to go work somewhere else with ethics. A mountain of debt. I'm going to churn the other way because I need to pay the light bill next week. Economists have said that at times, this situation financially that we find ourselves in has crippled the job market because it's forced people to put up with environments and limits because of their financial situations. And so when we hear people talking about debt forgiveness and the issues with the current situation in forgiving student loans, we have to think about what other things that we do with our debt, our budget deficit as a country, and how we spend taxpayer dollars. If you're a large oil company, you can get tax credits. You can get subsidies to help start new projects. You can help get cheap leases on federal and tribal lands. All of those things. If you're a large pharmaceutical company, we can help as the federal government pay to do your research, and then you can copyright that technology and make money off of it. There's all sorts of ways. The PPP loans are a prime example of debt forgiveness and how we judge it. So when we look at some of the things that were done with that, we change the narrative of how we looked at things with the political strategists that were behind Reagan. We're going to defund black people. That was the 1950s. We changed the words, we made things a little vague, but we still helped cater to a racist base to help it grow. And then through the destabilization of education, financial economies, and helping strap people to prevent feedback, riots, protests, we've kept a society in control. So where do we go from here and what do we look at? If you look out the windows of the church, you see a beautiful little garden out there, right? The work of volunteers, friends, family, and members of the church. Did the price on vegetables go up outside, out front? No. But it helps build community and it helps subsidize. And for years there was the art of canning, home preservation, and things that were used when people had more time to help put a barrier against the increase in cost of living and things like that. So as we look at those things and how we move forward, how are we able to do more with less? We added the cable and the Wi-Fi bill, the cell phone bill, and a series of other bills to our monthly budgets, but the wages stayed the same, so we're doing more with less. But how can we cut back in other areas to help make the dollars stretch further? How can we speak up? How can we show up? How can we make a difference? So as we move forward in life, it's the age-old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. An ancient saying going back to at least the 1st century BC. And it is referenced in the sword of Damocles. I looked at the pronunciation earlier, sorry if I'm butchering it. So the Roman orator Cicero, who lived from 106 to 43 BC, you may have read it in the text of a Greek historian. And Cicero used it in one of his pieces, which was then passed into European culture mainstream following the review of the works of Cicero. Damocles was pandering to his king, Dionysus, exclaiming that Dionysus was truly fortunate as a great man of power and authority without peer, surrounded by magnificence, and in response, Dionysus offered to switch places with Damocles for one day so that he could taste the very fortune firsthand. Damocles quickly and eagerly accepted the king's proposal. Damocles sat on the king's throne surrounded by countless luxuries, and there was beautifully embroidered rugs, fragrant perfumes, and the most select foods for the time. Piles of silver and gold, and the service of attendants unparalleled in their beauty surrounded Damocles with riches and excess. But Dionysus, who had made many enemies during his reign, arranged that a sword should hang above the throne, held at the pommel only by a single horse's tail hair, to evoke the sense of what it is like to be king. Though having much fortune, always having to watch in fear and anxiety against the dangers that might try to overtake him. Damocles finally begged the king that he be allowed to depart because he no longer wanted to be so fortunate, realizing that with great power comes great responsibility. King Dionysus effectively conveyed this sense of constant fear in which a person with great power may live. Dionysus committed many cruelties in his rise to power, such that he could never go on to rule justly, because that would have made him vulnerable to his enemies. And Cicero used that story as the last in a series of contrasting examples for reaching the conclusion of his 5th piece of work, in which the theme is that having virtue is sufficient in living a happy life. What is our virtue in today's society to have a happy life? In modern technology, we have great power at our fingertips. The modern internet puts many things at our fingertips, and knowledge is truly power when applied. The gatekeepers have changed in many ways, but don't be fooled. They might no longer exist in the sense that we are used to, but they have just taken different forms. They still exist. For example, internet neutrality, project funding, media bias, private media funding, paid lobbyists, an underfunded justice system that doesn't represent society, copyright enforcement extensions, tax law systems, etc. So the gatekeepers are still there. Our job is to keep showing up, use the power of technology combined with critical thinking to do good. As John Wesley shared in 1799, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. As a gay man from rural America, perhaps my greatest act of resistance in my life will be my existence and my decision to continue showing up to do good, in part for myself, but also for the generations that come before me that could have only dreamed for the opportunities I've been given, and for the future generations yet to come that will someday inherit what we leave behind when my time on this planet is done. They win when we stop showing up, when we stop protesting, when we stop being present. They can be whomever you want them to be. Political leaders, environmental polluters, tax-avoiding billionaires, your abusive ex, society's preconceived notions of what you are. So yes, my ask for you is to continue showing up. Show up in your life, show up with your families, show up for your children, show up for your community. We never come to realize the impact our presence has on this world, but we can hope that our active commitment helps push the needle of humanity in a direction we'd like it to go. In the sands of time, we may not be remembered or written about, but a sea of desert sand is made of millions of grains, and even if we are just one grain, as a collective, we can help continue to create change caused by the tide of time, etching away on the surface, hoping to reveal better tomorrow.